The battle for Toretsk, once a major mining town, is of strategic importance. Its fall could open the way for Russian troops to the industrial center of Konstantinovka, 20 kilometers to the northwest. From there they could advance on the last unoccupied towns in the Donetsk region: Druzhkovka, Kramatorsk, Slavyansk and Lyman, the Telegraph reports. Capturing these cities would give Russia full control over Donetsk, one of its main goals in the war. This is especially important against the backdrop of negotiations between Moscow and Washington that could lead to Ukrainian concessions in exchange for peace. The long 7-month battle for Toretsk illustrates the overall course of the war as it approaches its 3rd anniversary, showing how Russia is making slow but steady progress despite suffering huge losses. Ukraine estimates that Russia has lost as many soldiers in the past year as it did in the first 2 years of the war. "We have a hard time pushing them back because they don't care how many of their men die," says Yuri, called sign Gagarin, a mortar company commander in Toretsk. "If one soldier dies, they just send 2 more. This approach explains the high casualty rate not seen in Europe since World War II, which is more reminiscent of World War I, with Russian troops storming positions under intense fire. The last few months have been the deadliest for the Russian army, with daily casualties sometimes exceeding 1,500. The Russians could have captured 4,168 square kilometers of territory by 2024, but suffered 427,000 casualties in the process, according to the Institute for the Study of War, ISW. As for Toretsk and other cities in the Donetsk region, Russia will likely have to continue to win expensive and insignificant victories rather than make significant breakthroughs. At the brigade headquarters near Kramatorsk, Major Dmitry Mokich monitors the situation through screens in the underground command post bunker. Electronic warfare systems allow surveillance of every corner of Toretsk. The videos make it clear why the battle for the city is so intense. Any movement is immediately noticed by drone operators such as Octopus. The use of armored vehicles here only attracts the enemy's attention. The nature of war has changed, says Mokich. A modern T-90 tank costs millions of dollars, but we can destroy it with a few FPV drones which cost only a few $1,000s. The Russians now mostly move on foot or on motorcycles and buggies. Even then, it's a risky business. Russia, with a population 4 times larger than Ukraine, has mobilized a large convict population and is an effective recruiter. In addition to recruiting soldiers from North Korea, Russia is adding 600 to 1,000 fighters daily to its army, allowing it to keep 400,000 troops on the front lines against 250,000 Ukrainians. As a result, Russia is currently compensating for its losses by continuing to seize territory in the Donetsk region. In October 2023, it took Volodar, and in 2024, Kurakovo and Velika Novosilka. These successes complement the capture of Bakhmut in May 2023 and Avdiivka in February 2024. All of these battles have become symbols of Russia's mass attack tactics. Russian troops are easily expended. They don't believe their people are worth saving, says Angelica Evans, a Russia analyst at the ISW. Despite Russia's heavy losses, the retreat of Ukrainian troops from Donbass raises fears that Moscow will inevitably achieve victory. But Ukrainian commanders see it differently, noting that by holding the Russians back in cities like Toretsk, they are inflicting losses that could weaken their fighting power in the long term. Major Mokich notes that strikes on Russian ammunition factories are already having an effect. Since the beginning of 2024, Ukrainian military personnel have recorded a decrease in the intensity of artillery shelling in Toretsk. In addition to significant losses of personnel, Russia may experience a critical shortage of tanks and armored personnel carriers by the end of the year. The irony is that as Russia slows its advance on the front lines, its diplomatic position is strengthened by the Trump administration, whose team is pushing for a quick end to the war, which many in Europe believe could benefit Moscow. The publication concludes that, whatever the outcome of the fighting, there is a growing awareness in Ukraine that the conflict may be resolved not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table, and it is not a fact that Ukraine will be invited to this table.
A dozen leaders from Europe and Canada are visiting Ukraine's capital to mark the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion in a show of support by some of Kiev's most important backers for the nation at war. According to Associated Press, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau were among the visitors greeted at the train station by Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha and the President's Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak. Von der Leyen wrote on social media that Europe's destiny was at stake. The guests attended anniversary events and met with President Volodymyr Zelensky as U.S. policy shifts under President Donald Trump.
The Russo-Ukrainian War. European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Trudeau. Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen. Prime Minister of the Republic of Estonia, Christensen. European Parliament. The official ceremony is concluded.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said on Sunday Ukraine must have a long-term secure future, and the UK would deepen its solidarity with the country. The economic insecurity that the conflict has caused, the rising bills, cost of living crisis, that will only continue unless we have a resolution that is fair and stable for Ukraine, Starmer said during a speech in Glasgow, Scotland. This is one of the great lessons of our history. Instability in Europe always washes up on our shores, and this is a generational moment. According to Associated Press, he was speaking as he prepared to visit Washington this week alongside French President Emmanuel Macron in an attempt to persuade U.S. President Donald Trump not to abandon Ukraine in pursuit of a peace deal in the nearly three-year-old war with Russia. There is an element of good cop, bad cop in efforts by Starmer and Macron to salvage American support for Kiev. Starmer, reluctant to openly confront Trump, speaks of being a bridge between Europe and the U.S. administration. Macron has more strongly criticized Trump's recent statements that echo Russia's narrative and American moves to negotiate with Moscow while sidelining Ukraine. Starmer also stressed the need for countries in Europe to invest more in the continent's defense and security. I've been saying for some time that we Europeans, including the United Kingdom, have to do more for our defense and security. The US is right about that, he said. In this new era, we can't cling on to the comforts of the past. It's time to take responsibility for our security, our continent. And I'm clear that Britain will take a leading responsibility.
Nobody wants the bloodshed to continue. Nobody, least of all the Ukrainians. But after everything that they have suffered, after everything that they have fought for, there can be no discussion about Ukraine without Ukraine, and the people of Ukraine must have a long-term secure future. You don't forget the conversations that I had there. People who had to gather up the bodies of their friends, their family, their brothers and sisters, and wheel them into a mass grave using shopping trolleys. You don't forget things like that. But mark my words, what I have seen only makes me more determined to stand up for Ukraine, to put them in the best possible position and make sure they have the security and the hope that they need. And look, We can be proud that we stood up. But as we enter a new phase in this conflict, we must now deepen our solidarity even further. It's not just moral urgency that demands this. It's also in our national interest. Russia already menaces our waters, our online spaces, even at times our streets. And the economic insecurity that the conflict has caused, the rising bills, cost of living crisis, that will only continue unless we have a resolution that is fair and stable for Ukraine. This is one of the great lessons of our history. Instability in Europe always washes up on our shores. And this is a generational moment. I've been saying for some time that we Europeans, including the United Kingdom, have to do more for our defence and security. The US is right about that. In this new era, we can't cling on to the comforts of the past. It's time to take responsibility for our security, our continent. And I'm clear that Britain will take a leading responsibility. We have to be ready to play our role if a force is required in Ukraine once a peace agreement is reached. And we have to be ready to reshape our economy with industrial policy, to stand up for Ukraine, to stand up for Europe, but most of all, to stand up for our security, because Ukraine is vital to us.